My name is Harbona, and I was an attendant to the great king, King Xerxes. Now, you may be wondering, how in the world did I get the job, or what is it that I did for the king? In your culture, you would call what I did, I don't know, an executive assistant, or maybe you would call what I did a valet, or chief of staff, or something like that. And you should know that I didn't really want the job. Sure, I would get to live in luxury in the palace and get to serve one of the most powerful men in the empire, in the world really, but I knew about Xerxes. I knew that he could fly off the handle at any given moment. I knew that you had to be very, very careful around that man. So I took the job and I began to start, and I learned to keep my head down, to be seen but not heard, to be quiet, to just do my job in such a way and never, ever, ever rub him the wrong way. And if you have time, go ahead and look it up in your holy scriptures. You'll see my name, Harbona. I was there. I saw all these events, and I came today to tell you from my perspective about these series of coincidences, these series of events, these series of just so happens that all somehow worked out beautifully for the Jewish people. And I really couldn't believe it. It was just unreal how like this one domino fell and one thing after another, and all just worked out. And I was there. I got to see it all, and it was absolutely incredible. So as I look back and as I think about when did it start, I would say probably I start to kind of pay attention during the 180-day party that Xerxes threw for all his royal nobles and officials and military leaders. 180 days of drinking and celebrating and dancing and women. It was really incredible. And then there was another party 7 more days after, just for the people who lived in the citadel of Susa. And make no mistake, this was not just a party just to have fun. No. King Xerxes was a brilliant strategist, an unbelievable politician, a fantastic military leader, and he brought all of his nobles and officials and military leaders together because he needed all of their support to overthrow the Greeks. See, kings are never satisfied. Kings always want more. And even though the Persian Empire was massive, King Xerxes wanted more. He wanted Greece. And he was going to need all of their support. He was going to need everyone to come together to support him in this military campaign. And at first, he got their support. And at first, it started very, very well. Go ahead and look it up in your history books. We overtook Athens, and then we beat those annoying Spartans at the Battle of Thermopylae. Oh, but there was one battle, a navy battle. It was right off of the island of Salamis, and we had hundreds of our ships, but they cornered us and they squeezed us in, and they destroyed 200 of our own ships. It was a terrible day. It was an awful day. Actually, King Xerxes lost 2 of his own nephews who died in battle. In fact, the king had to slip away secretly in a fishing boat and get back to the citadel of Susa, where I awaited on him. And all of our commanders came back, with their tails between their legs, totally embarrassed. It was awful. And those days in the palace were terrible. Xerxes was depressed. He was in an awful mood. He would wail and cry. He would stay in his room for days upon days. And then one day he even cried out for his former queen Vashti and longed for her embrace. But that was impossible because she was banished from the kingdom. And I knew that something had to be done. But what could I do? I'm just an attendant. And so I thought about it, and I thought, okay, women always seem to do the trick for Xerxes. And so I looked for the moment. I waited for a time, and it was just after dinner, after he had a few drinks, and I said, "Your king, your highness, your excellency, what if we gathered all of the beautiful virgins from all over the empire, and we brought hundreds of them all in, and we'll make them even more beautiful. We'll make them smelling great. We'll take a year and we'll make them unbelievable, and then you could spend time with them and they could spend time with you, and I don't know, maybe you'll fancy one of them, and I don't know, just maybe you'll want her to be your queen. And I didn't know how he would take it, because that's not how queens were chosen, especially in the royal household of Persia. But you guys, he loved the idea. I mean, who wouldn't love the idea? He loved the idea, and suddenly the palace was buzzing with excitement. There were girls from all over the empire, hundreds of them. The palace was alive again. It smelled incredible, and Xerxes spent time with many of the women. And I'll be honest with you guys, it did wonders for his health. He was a new man. But there was one woman that he spent a lot of time with. There was one woman he really, I would say, even fell in love with. I'll never forget her name. Her name was Esther. And she was beautiful both inside and outside. And they spent a lot of time together. And sure enough, he made her his queen. And as I look back on those days, I couldn't really tell where she came from. She didn't look like she came from Medes. She wasn't Babylonian. I couldn't really tell her ethnicity at the time. But at the time, I didn't care. I just cared that the king was happy and he was happy. And oh my goodness, you guys, things went so well for about 5 years. Things were going spectacular. But I'll never forget the day when things started to change. I was in the royal throne room with the king, and he was hearing from his different officials and getting updates on the kingdom, and in walked Haman. I couldn't stand this guy. You know, Haman rose to power quickly. I don't even know how he did it. No one really liked him. I certainly didn't trust him, but I would never tell the king that. Are you kidding me? And Haman came in with his chest puffed up and his head held high, and he had this carefully crafted speech all set and ready for the king. And if I remember correctly, it said something like this. He said, my king, you know, there's a people in your provinces, all over your empire, in fact, they keep themselves separate from you, from our people. They actually, king, they don't obey your laws. They keep themselves separate. You know, it's really, king, not in your best interest to keep these people around. And so, you know, being the guy that I am, Haman said, I'll take care of them and we'll get rid of them. And I'll even give you 10,000 talents of silver from my royal treasury. King, what do you think about that? And you know what? To my surprise, the king said, fine, Haman, do whatever you want. Keep your money. I don't need your money. And that was that. But something was fishy to me. First of all, I couldn't believe that the king didn't want to know who these people were. I wanted to know who these people were. And Haman, what was in this for Haman? He never did anything without something in it for him. He was willing to give up 10,000 talents of silver? No. So I had to investigate. Oh, yeah. And then I know people. Right? I knew people that worked for the royal, the household of Haman. And so I slipped out of the palace that same day and grabbed tea with my dear friend. He'll remain nameless. And I said, hey, tell me what's really going on here. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing. See, back in those days, there was a council, a royal council of representatives, and the representatives were chosen from every different racial and ethnic group who lived in the empire, and they would gather together, and they represented the entire empire, and they would hear cases and grievances from all the different people, and they would handle all the little things that we didn't want to bother the king with, but big things we would then give to the king. And Haman, from what I was told, would come into those council meetings. And of course, when he would walk in, everyone would bow down to Haman and give him honor and respect. Well, the king made us do that, by the way. No one liked the guy. But there was one Jew who would not bow down to him. There was one Jew who refused to pay him honor and respect. And you know what, you guys? Haman despised this man for that. And so I couldn't believe it. So now Haman, because of one Jew, wanted to kill all the Jews. And I looked and I read the edict. It was terrible. It said, destroy, kill, and annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children, on the month of Adar, which was 11 months from the time that I was reading it. So the poor Jewish people had to wait 11 months until they'd be destroyed. Awful, terrible. Yeah, like you should know that even, us Persians were very tolerant of other people and other religions. There are a lot of different beliefs around the time. And what did we care about Jews? And, they did keep themselves separate. They didn't eat pork, which I didn't understand that. I love bacon. But they kept themselves separate. They called them, dietary laws and restrictions or whatever. But they obeyed the laws as far as I could tell. They were fine people, so I couldn't believe it. And so I came back to the palace and I thought, well, maybe I should tell the king. I mean, he certainly doesn't know that it's the Jewish people that they're gonna destroy. But I'm like, no. Why would I stick my neck out? No. I'm not going to say anything. That's crazy. So I don't know. It was maybe a day or two later. It's all blurred. It's been quite some time now. But I heard some commotion on the outside of the king's gates, and I looked out I was on the second floor of the palace, that's right. I looked out the window, and there was some man out there screaming and moaning and wailing. He looked terrible. His hair was all messed up. There was ash covering his face. His clothes were all ripped, and I'm like, dude, someone better go tell that guy to shut up, because the king was not in any mood. That guy's crazy. And so maybe I should. So I started to walk down the stairs, and I see my dear friend Hathach. Do you guys know Hathach? No? Well, he did my job, but he did it for the queen. He was the queen's attendant. And I saw Hathach, and Hathach had some clothes. And I said, Hathach, where are you going? Oh, she's like, I'm rushing outside. The queen wants me to go give that man out there a new set of clothes. And I thought, oh my goodness. See, that's what I loved about Esther. She had such a big heart. How many queens would care about some crazy man outside doing whatever he was doing? I said, good for you, Hathach. And he left. And I don't remember what I did. I was doing my own business and whatever, getting ready to go back and see the king. Well, then I saw Hathach come back in, and he still had the clothes. I said, Hathach, what's the deal? Were they too small? Were they too big? How come? And he's like, oh no, that person out there would not take the clothes. And in fact, he gave me this note that he wants to give to the queen. And I grabbed the note and I opened it up, and it was a copy of the edict. And I said, well, what are you doing with this? Well, that man do you know who that is out there? I said, I have no idea who that is. Well, that's the Jew that sits on the council. And then I thought, now wonder why he's mourning and distraught. I would be too if I were Jewish. Well, that man out there wants me to bring this edict to the queen and tell the queen to go see the king about it. And I said, what in the world is going on here? The king already knows about the edict, Hathach, and why is the queen being involved in this? What does this have to do with her? Hathach, this is insane, but hey, go do what you need to do. And he left, and I don't know, it was just moments later where I saw Hathach again, and he looked terrified. I said, Hathach, what's wrong? And he grabbed me, and he said, the queen is Jewish. The queen is Jewish? Yeah, and then Hathach said, and that man outside, that's her uncle Mordecai. And now wonder why he was trying to get the queen involved. Oh my gosh, wait a second. Haman wants to destroy all the Jews. The king signed it as law, but the king has no idea that the queen is Jewish. Oh my goodness. And then Hathach said, I said, well, what's she going to do? And Hathach said, well, she didn't want to do anything about it. I said, yeah, I don't blame her. The king hasn't called for her in like 30 days. You do not go and see the king without a personal appointment. Trust me, I know how that works out for people. I saw it many times. And so that Jew out there, that guy told her that she will not be spared, that the king will find out that she is Jewish. And then he told her these words, maybe you're a queen for such a time as this. Well, what's she going to do? Well, she's asking her people, the Jewish people, to fast for 3 days, and then she's going to go see the king. And I said, she can't do that. That's not going to work out well. And then Hathach grabbed me and said, Harbona, why don't you talk to the king? Please, you go talk to the king. I said, are you insane? Do you really think I'm going to get in between a conflict between Haman, Xerxes, and Esther? No, thank you. No. And later that night, as I lay in bed, I thought, oh my goodness, things are sure going to get interesting around the palace. Haman wants to destroy the Jews. There's this guy, this Jewish man who is trying to get involved. The queen's going to go see the king. That's not going to work out well. I'm just going to lay low and keep my mouth shut. But this will sure be fun to see. And those 3 days took forever. Oh my goodness, they took forever. And I was with the king, and we were in the royal throne room, and he was listening to the various grievances and disputes. It was so boring. But he wanted to keep his side door open at that time, which we occasionally did. And I was standing next to him, and I looked, and I saw her. Oh, Esther looked gorgeous, you guys. She had on her royal robes and she was all dolled up. She looked incredible. But I got to be honest, my heart stopped. I could barely breathe because I was like, man, Xerxes was not in a mood today. He was in a mood today. And I just sat there, hardly breathing. What was the king going to do? And then he did it. He reached out to her his gold scepter, which was her invitation to come in. I just went, oh, but I had to keep it cool. But I was like, oh my goodness, that would have been terrible. And Queen Esther came in so graciously, and the king said, you look beautiful today. Tell me, my queen, whatever you want, and I will happily give it to you, even up to half of my kingdom. And I sat there thinking, half of your kingdom? That's amazing. And so I leaned in to listen. What is she going to ask for? I knew what she was going to ask for. But then she invited the king and Haman to a personal banquet, to a really, really nice brunch, I think you would call it today, on their behalf. And I was like, what? Why in the world would she do that? And I just was so confused. How come she wouldn't just tell the king what she needed and what she wanted? I mean, he was feeling apparently very generous. I didn't understand it at the time. But now, as I look back, something else was going on. Two very interesting things happened between that first banquet, and then she asked them to come to a second banquet. But in between those two banquets, two very interesting things happened. The first was this, and again, just so you know, I heard this from my friend who worked in the household of Haman. Apparently, Haman left that first banquet feeling high and mighty, definitely drunk if I know Haman. And of course, who did he pass by on his way out of the king's gate? That Jew. And that Jew refused to bow down to him, refused to pay him honor. So Haman went home and he threw this lavish party. He invited all of his friends and all of his family, and he just wanted to tell them how brilliant, how amazing, how wealthy, how powerful the good old Haman was, because he had a personal lunch with the king and the queen, and he was the king's right-hand man, and blah, 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 blah. That's what I heard happen. But he was still annoyed by that Jew. And he was so frustrated and enraged by that Jew. So it was his wife, Zeresh. Oh, she was an awful person too, but don't tell her I told you that. It was his wife who came up with this sinister idea, this plan, and said, honey, you don't need to wait 11 months to kill that Jew. You're the king's right-hand man. You're powerful. How about you do this? Why don't you set up a large, 75-foot pole. You could do that tonight. We'll get some of our workers to help you. And then be the first person in the morning to see the king. And then ask the king's permission to impale that Jew on that pole. And Haman said, honey, that's a great idea. And he immediately went to work. Or at least that's what I was told. But then a second thing happened. I was dozing off in my bed, and suddenly I heard, Harbona, Harbona, get here. Bring me something to read. I can't sleep. And I was startled because Xerxes slept like a baby, trust me. But suddenly on that night, he couldn't sleep. So I jumped out of bed and I ran to our royal library, and there was hundreds and hundreds of volumes. And I grabbed a book and I ran into his room and I sat down and I opened up the book and I began to read. And I came across a very, very interesting story. It was a story that happened several years back, and there was a Jew who overheard a plot to kill the king. The Jew told the queen told the king, and the king's life was spared. And Xerxes kind of leaned out of bed and said, oh, I remember that. Yeah. What do we do for that Jew? What was his name, Harbona? What was his name? Mordecai, something like that. And I said, no, Your Highness, his name is Mordecai, and as far as I can tell, you didn't do anything for him. And he said, Harbona, first thing in the morning, remind me of that Jew and let's do something for him. But I'm feeling exhausted, and he just flat out went to sleep. But then I couldn't sleep, right? I mean, I went to my bedroom and I couldn't sleep. And I said, wait a second, Haman's outside working on a pole to impale that Jew, Mordecai. He's going to come in and ask for permission to kill him. Meanwhile, he has no idea that Xerxes wants to honor him. This is going to be fun. So I didn't sleep at all, you guys. I did not sleep. And so the next day, I'm trying my best to attend the king and stay awake. And he said, Harbona, let's take care of that Jew, but I'm fresh out of ideas. Is any of my advisors outside? I said, well, why, yes, your king. Haman's outside. Oh, great, bring him in. So in comes Haman, that rat, his chest was high, his head was high, and he comes in, and before Haman could say one word, Xerxes, the great king, said, hey, Haman, there's a man in my empire that I want to honor, a man that I owe a lot to. He did me a solid. He took care of me when my life was at risk, and I'm fresh out of ideas. But what do you think I should do for the man that the king wants to honor? And oh my goodness, Haman couldn't control himself. He was giddy. He clearly had been thinking about this. He clearly thought that the king was talking to him, but I just shut my mouth and just watched. And Haman, that little rascal, was saying, oh yes, Your Highness, thank you for asking me. I've thought some of this. Now, if it pleases you, King, he just was buttering him up. He said, King, why don't you give that man, I don't know, a royal crown like the one you're wearing? And why don't you put on him a royal robe? That purple one with the sequins that the one that's really beautiful. Yeah, why don't you put that on that man? And out of all of your royal stallions, why don't you let him ride on that black one, with the crest that he had? Yeah, that one. And then have one of your attendants, hey, Harbona would be great at that. I'm like, don't put my name into this. And have them parade that man all through the town of Susa, exclaiming, this is a man that the king wants to honor. And you guys, you should have seen his face. The king said, great idea, Haman. Now go do that for that Jew named Mordecai. Mordecai. And Haman, I really want to honor this guy, and since you're my right-hand man, you take him through the citadel of Susa. And Haman, shout loud, because I want everyone to know that I'm honoring this guy. It was fantastic. I wish you guys could have been there. Haman's face looked like he had seen a ghost. And he got out of the palace, and the king looked at me and said, Harbona, is Haman okay? He looked like he's sick. And I said, oh no, King, he's doing just fine. And just left it at that. Well, the king and I, along with Esther, were at this second banquet, this second really nice lunch, and in comes Haman. He was not looking very well. I didn't mind at all. And we began to eat and to drink. And after the lunch was almost over, finally, King turned to Esther and said, "My honey, my love, my queen, finally, now can you tell me what it is that you want? Anything. I'll give you up to half of my kingdom." And finally, she did it, you guys. She got emotional and said, "King, if it pleases you, spare my life, and please spare the life of my people who are facing destruction." And the king got enraged and said, "What are you talking about? No one will ever destroy you. My queen, I love you. Like, tell me who it is that would ever do such a vile thing like that." And she points at Haman. And oh my gosh, I thought Haman was going to pass out. He said, "That man right there, Haman." And Xerxes says, "What do you mean, Haman? Wait. Oh, that stupid edict. That decree." And he got so mad that he got up and Xerxes went out of the room. He went out to the patio to cool off, but I wanted to stay inside. I wanted to see what was going to happen. So I just stood there, and Haman, as he would only do, started to grovel and say, "Oh, Queen Esther, please spare my life. I had no idea that you were Jewish. I'm so sorry. Please, please, please." And then it got really weird. He got on his knees and began to inch closer to her. And meanwhile, Esther wouldn't even look at him, you guys. But then Haman kind of fell over into him, and I was like, oh my gosh. And right at that moment, Xerxes walks in, and he was furious. He said, "How dare you? You now want to molest my queen? Guards, seize him and cover his face." Whenever you cover someone's face, that is it. But then I spoke up, and I said, "King, just so you know, there's a pole outside. And it's all ready, and Haman wanted to impale the Jew on it." "Great idea, Harbona. Guards, impale Haman on that pole and do it immediately." I was kind of proud with myself. And then King Xerxes, along with Queen Esther, drafted a new edict. You should know that in Persia, you couldn't just cancel an edict. Once it was law, it was law. So they drafted a new edict, and this new decree essentially said that on that fateful day when the Jews were set to be destroyed, that the Jewish people could actually not only protect themselves, but they could band together and protect themselves, and the Persian Empire would not do anything to stop the Jewish people from protecting themselves. And they issued that decree, sent it all over to all the provinces, all over the empire, and you should have heard the dancing and rejoicing and celebrating in the streets of Susa. It was a sight to behold. And so I went back to my room, and I just started to think about all those events for the last couple years and months and weeks and days. And I looked out to my left, and I saw Haman impaled, that poor, evil soul. And I looked down, and I saw the Jews celebrating in the streets. And I just sat back, and I wondered, gosh, how did all these events just so happened to work out so beautifully for the Jewish people? I mean, how was Queen Esther chosen out of the hundreds of other women to be queen? And how was Mordecai in the right place and at the right time and to hear a plot to assassinate the king? And why did he tell Esther to keep her identity, her ethnicity quiet? And it all came out in just the right moment. And how was it that the king couldn't sleep that one night when he always slept? And how was it that I just so happened to grab a volume out of the hundreds of volumes, and I opened up the page to the right page where it shared the entire story? And then how did it happen that the king didn't honor Mordecai at that time, but years later was now looking at honoring him? And how was it that Haman was the only advisor outside in the waiting room when the king wanted some ideas? And it just went on and on. How did all of this happen? And for me, as I sat there, as I thought about it all, I thought maybe maybe there is a God. Maybe the God of the Jewish people truly does care for his people and protect his people, but his methods and his timing are very, very interesting, that to be sure. And then I thought about you. And as I came here today to share this story, as far as I'm told, that God is the same God that you worship and adore today. And if that is true, if that is the same God, if you are now a follower of God today, then you are so fortunate. Because maybe, just maybe, in the chaos and confusion and suffering and pain of your life, that same God is working behind the scenes of your life as well. Well, my name is Harbona, and I was an attendant to the great king, the mighty King Xerxes. Thank you for listening to my story.